Hello, and welcome to the April edition of the U.S. Africa Business Roundup. I'm Florizelle Liser, President and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa, CCA. This month, on the margins of the World Bank IMF spring meetings in Washington, D.C., we convened a series of high-level discussions that reflect both the momentum and the urgency shaping the U.S.-Africa commercial relationship. We began on April 14th with a roundtable on Africa's emerging investment frontiers, held in partnership with Bridge Connect. This conversation brought together leaders from multilateral institutions, private investors, and government to examine how we move from dialogue to deal-making. A key highlight was the perspective from Senegal's Minister of Economy, who underscored the importance of macroeconomic stability, legal certainty, and bankable projects in attracting sustained investment. At the same time, participants were clear-eyed about the challenges, including financing gaps, energy costs, and administrative hurdles. What stood out most was the shift in narrative. Africa is no longer being framed simply as a market of potential, but as a market of performance, partnership, and profit. With the African Continental Free Trade Area creating a $3.4 trillion single market, the opportunity is clear. The question now is execution. On April 15th, we turned our attention to Guinea and the presentation of Simandou 2040, an ambitious long-term development strategy that positions the country as a major player in critical minerals and infrastructure. We were honored to hear from senior government leaders, including the Minister of Economic, Finance, and Budget, and the Minister of Planning, International Cooperation and Development, who outlined Guinea's vision for transforming its natural resource wealth into sustainable economic growth. The message from Guinea was straightforward. They are building a transparent, competitive, and investor-ready environment, and they are looking for long-term partners. With projected growth of up to 10% annually, this is a market that investors cannot afford to overlook. The following day, April 16th, we hosted an investor briefing on Côte d'Ivoire in partnership with the government of Côte d'Ivoire. The Minister of Economy, Finance, and Budget highlighted the country's strong macroeconomic foundation, while the Minister of Planning and Development outlined the priorities of the 2026 to 2030 National Development Plan in Côte d'Ivoire. The Assistant Secretary General for Global Markets and Director General of the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service at the U.S. Department of Commerce presented the U.S. government's commercial strategy in Africa. The highlight of the forum was the signing of an MOU between the ABD Group, a member of CCA, and the Minister of Economy, Finance, and Budget for a $500 million investment in Côte d'Ivoire's key sectors, including health, education, and infrastructure. What makes Côte d'Ivoire particularly compelling right now is its focus on inclusive growth. The government is not only investing in major economic hubs, but is actively working to expand opportunity into secondary cities and rural regions. For U.S. companies, this creates a wider landscape of opportunities across agriculture, digital transformation, and infrastructure. Finally, on April 21st, we convened a critical dialogue on the renewal of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, scheduled to end on December 2026, and beyond AGOA, focusing on the future of the U.S.-Africa trade relationship. Held on Capitol Hill, this discussion brought together policymakers, private sector leaders, and African diplomatic representatives to examine AGOA's renewal as well as what comes next. Congressman Gregory Meeks, ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, emphasized that AGOA renewal is not enough. Modernization is essential if AGOA is to deliver meaningful, long-term economic partnership between the United States and its African partners. Across 2 panels that included a key voice from the U.S. Congress, the African Union, and private sector executives, there was strong alignment that the next phase of U.S.-Africa trade must be more strategic, more investment-driven, and more responsive to today's global realities. Taken together, these conversations point to a single conclusion. The foundation for deeper U.S.-Africa commercial engagement is already in place. What is needed now is alignment, action, and sustained commitment from both the U.S. and African public and private sectors. And that is exactly what CCA believes will be delivered at the upcoming U.S. Africa Business Summit, CCA's annual event bringing together African heads of state and ministers, key U.S. government officials, and U.S. and African private sector leaders. We will convene U.S. and African leaders from across government and industry in Mauritius for what is the premier gathering focused on advancing trade, investment, and business between the United States and Africa. If you are serious about doing business on the continent, this is where you need to be. Join us in July to connect with decision makers, explore real opportunities, and help shape the future of the U.S.-Africa Economic Partnership. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in Mauritius at the summit in July.